Are you worried about a recession, and do you want to make sure you're prepared in case we do have a recession? In this episode, we're going to be talking about everything you need to know to prepare for a recession. We'll be talking about what is a recession and what you need to do to think through how to make lemonade out of these lemons. What actions can you personally take to make the best of this recession? Hi, I'm Bridget Sullivan Mermal, and I have a fee-only financial planning practice in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm John Shear. I have a fee-only financial planning practice in Middleton, Wisconsin. And before we start talking about how to prepare for recession, I want to remind everybody to hit that subscribe button. That helps other people find this show and helps us rise in the rankings. So click subscribe, and let's get into talking about recession, Bridget. I tell you, one of the things that I hear about or I think about, and somebody will ask, is, well, what the heck even is a recession, right? You're afraid of it. It's kind of a scary thing, but I think it's worthwhile to talk about. Like, what are we actually talking about when we talk about a recession?
Well, technically, when the news announces that we're having a recession, it means that the GDP, or the gross domestic product, has been down for 2 consecutive quarters. And one of the reasons that people are talking about a recession is that the GDP was down in the last quarter. Okay, so in the first quarter of 2022, it was down. And now we're awaiting new numbers that'll come out in July for the second quarter. So that's technically what a recession is.
So if second quarter ends up that GDP is down again, then the announcement will come, we're in recession, right?
Right.
But it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about, the stock market hasn't been doing very well,
Right.
The bond market hasn't been doing very well,
Right.
There's a lot of these things, inflation's, it sort of feels like, from just a regular person, you go like, I don't know, it feels kind of recession-y, right? Whatever that is, but yet there's this technical definition about like what goes on, and there's some sort of a dichotomy, it seems, between those things.
Well, and in the current circumstances, it's unique, and all of the different circumstances that contributed to every recession have been unique. But in our situation now, because of the pandemic, the GDP, or what really we use to call a recession, like calling a foul, it usually kind of goes in a very, it goes up to 3% and down, under, and then up.
Kind of linear, right? Kind of a smoothish wave.
And they try to keep it at 2 to 3%. That's what the people who have the controls of the economy, to the extent that they can control it, that's kind of where they try to keep it. Well, COVID came, and it was up almost 30, or down almost 30, up almost 30. Okay, so that is a big gyrations, okay? Yeah. And one of the things that is not emphasized when they talk about the GDP being down in the first quarter of 2022 is that in the third and fourth quarter of 2021, it was up way more, like 6-7%.
Nobody cares when it's so far up, but then when it goes down a little bit, then we suddenly have
So we have more of a roller coaster effect with the GDP than is usual. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why this, if they say there's a recession, it might be like, well, do I care? And that's one of your biggest questions is like, do I care?
Yeah.
What do I care about with recession? And I think when people fear a recession, there's 2 things involved. There's also, what's the definition? What are the levers? Mm-hmm. And then what can you do about it? So let's talk about what you can do about it. Okay. So the first tip is think about, what are you really afraid of? And that can be different depending on your stage of life. Mm-hmm. So if you're a young person, or, just have a regular job, chugging along, the biggest fear of recession might be losing your job.
Yeah, unemployment, right?
Right.
So that, and as you're describing that, I was thinking, if you're a younger person, that's where I go. If I'm an older person and I'm looking to get, hey, I'm approaching retirement now, I may be thinking more along the lines of inflation or my stock portfolio, right? Can I make that thing work? Right. And employment's still a big deal, but maybe a little bit of a different viewpoint depending on the stage that you're in.
Right, because employment, you might still care about employment if you're retired, just because you know a lot of young people, you want the economy to do it, all that kind of stuff, but you don't actually feel the pain. So, but if you're listening to the news, you might hear about a lot of pain, which you can decide how you feel about that.
You know, what's interesting in thinking about this, Bridget, is that we've had this high inflation and stock returns.
Right.
So my portfolios are down, right? And inflation's up, and we're not in a recession technically, right? And so, and I think this plays out if you look back in history, is that the stock market tends to be a leading indicator, right? I've got this bad stuff. I'm feeling bad about it, but we're not actually in a recession yet. And then if we wait to say, well, geez, if we are in a recession and how do we, I'm afraid of being into it, what do we do? Well, by the time we start coming out of it, the market has probably already come back up, or at least a lot of times. And so it gets into this dichotomy of like, okay, here's what I'm afraid of. This is really interesting to talk through. Like what, people are afraid of, whether it's inflation and you go like, oh, it's a recession. Well, recession's bad. What do you mean? We should be afraid of it, right? Well, you think about what do you actually, what is it, right? I think it's really helpful to define what is it that we're feeling that anxiety about, and then let's transition to like, what do you do about those things, right? And it's not, well, wait till we're out of a recession, because by that time it's probably too late, and by the time we're not even in a recession yet it feels kind of bad, right? So what sort of things do you have for people on?
There's one metaphor I want to use first, and that is like when I was going through puberty or other life stages, like physical life stages. You don't actually know that that's what happened until it's after the fact. And so you might have some hints, but there's other counterintuitive hints. Like so it's that's kind of what a recession's like. You get the diagnosis after you've gone through a lot of the pain a lot of times. So anyway, so
that's interesting.
What you want to do about it really depends on where you are in your stage of life. So if you are in this earning phase and you want to assess your job, so you want to assess your source of income and say, okay, am I doing the fundamentals, which is saving 10% of my income? And what about my emergency fund? Okay. So, and how you want to do an honest assessment of the realities of your job and if you're going to be able to keep your job or not, right? And so during a recession, say there's 10% unemployment, that would be very bad, right? But that says 90% of the people have jobs.
Yeah, right. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And of that 90%, 70% probably are really not worried, don't have anything to worry about. And then the 20% are maybe on the edges, right? And so are you in that 70%? You work for a large institution that you just know there's nothing that's going to happen at this job, right? So you want to make sure you have adequate emergency funds in case you're out of a job. And you had a great indicator of like, how long is it going to take me to get a job?
Yeah, it's interesting, and this goes back years and years, that a friend who was in, the headhunter or job placement would say that for every $10,000 a person makes, that's how many months it takes them to find a job after they've lost it, right? So somebody's making $50,000 a year, sort of expect it'll take about 5 months, to get a job again. If you're making $100,000 a year, expect it to take about 10 months.
Right.
And we've had clients and friends, you've known people, and you go through and golly, it's, maybe not exactly that, but in that ballpark on things, hey, people that are making, $120,000 a year, it takes about a year for it's, typically, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 18, right?
Right.
And what's useful about that, I think, is not just, well, here's the measure. It gives you perspective, right? If I don't know that, if somebody moves to Wisconsin and they don't know that winter comes, and then winter comes, you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, it's cold, right? But which is silly. You move to Wisconsin, you go, you know what, it's going to be winter. It might last 2 months, might last 4 months, but we know what we're getting into. It makes it easier to. I'm not like the winter, perhaps, right? And some people certainly, right? Geez, cold, and I don't like it. But it's not like, oh my gosh, what do I do about this? And a similar thought process, like, listen, hey, here's if I have to look for a new job, here's what it takes. And you go, oh, I don't have to like it. It's going to be anxiety ridden, right? Trying to figure out, but it's also not as scary when you go, oh yeah, here's what the expectation is. So setting expectations as you think about this, like, hey, is your job at risk? If it is, here's what it looks like. And that means that I need to have emergency funds and maybe even a little bit more, maybe build up a little more that you might, you can make some adjustments. But I'll tell you, it's really interesting in having this discussion that it comes back to the basics in so many ways, right? It's not, well, now what do we do? It's, well, the things we've always done, and maybe a little more attention to
Let's
the
think
emergent,
about it again.
maybe a little bit more to this, and then just make sure that, as time goes on, things float around, and you go, let's make sure that our fundamentals are taken care of, right? It's not this other different, well, now we need to do this completely different thing.
Right.
It's like, no, the same things, but just pay more attention to them.
Right, exactly. And back to the moving to Wisconsin analogy, it's like if somebody's moving to Wisconsin, you say, okay, this is how long it might last. 2 to 4 months.
Right.
And you say, well, what can I do to prepare? Well, buy a good winter coat.
Right.
You might plan a vacation
Right.
to somewhere warm. In March, I recommend.
But it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. Well, how do I avoid winter? Like, no, that's not how this goes.
Right.
That's a great. And you think about that. You go, well, that's not
We'll make some
avoiding a
plans.
recession. It's we're going to have recessions, right? This is part of the deal.
Yeah, and no matter where you live, there's going to be those kinds of weather, etc. incidents. Okay, so let's talk about what if you're in older, if you're retired.
Yeah. Well, in that other
Yeah.
it comes back to the basics
Right.
for me. I think is that. Listen, as you're approaching or into retirement, right, we want to have that, we call it the pantry, right? We want to have a bond ladder. We want to have guaranteed cash flow. And if you have that cash flow for 5 or 7 or 10 or 15 years, a recession, and again, recessions typically last a fairly short amount of time, sort of like winter in Wisconsin, right? And so it's a matter of not like, what do I do different? It's, oh yeah, that's right, we've sort of prepared for this. Maybe do I want to build the bond ladder a little bit farther out? Okay, you can think about those things. But it's just sort of sticking to the plan, and it's really having that plan in advance, not changing your approach, but making sure that those things that you had thought of already are buckled up the way that you want them to be, right? So that's how I think about that.
It also can help you more accurately assess your risk tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are really afraid because, geez, you're living off your portfolio and Social Security, maybe a pension, and your anxiety is super high about this recession stuff, then you might say, okay, I want to go back and look at how much risk I'm taking in my portfolio and reassess that. But that's only that how you feel is only one of very many factors. Right. So, but that's something to think about too. Like that's what I do with people is like, okay, let's reassess. Like how are we looking at this? That doesn't mean sell the stock market's down, sell everything and move into bonds. Like so that's you got to go somewhere, and so we like to have a good healthy mix. But realize also with inflation, there's a lot of fear of inflation. But remember, Social Security is inflation protected.
Right.
You get increases because of
raises.
Inflation. If you have a primary residence, you're with a mortgage or without a mortgage, you have one of your biggest expenses locked in.
Right.
So you have a lot of control over what you're spending and what inflation really affects.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting having this kind of going back to the basics. You said, and one of my questions is always sort of like, well, why do I care? Recession, why do I care about that? And it does sort of solidify that for me in that, not that it's not important, right? But why do I care? My situation, like what happens externally is way less important than internally. That how I handle it and, my stock portfolio maybe is more important than the technical definition of a recession is, right? It's what's happening to me and how I think about it. The actions that I take is way more important than if we're going to have a recession or not.
Right. So it gets back to what do I can control and what do I not control? I control how much savings I have, how much risk I'm taking in the stock market, how much I'm spending, but I don't control inflation. I don't control the stock market.
GDP.
Exactly.
Right,
I don't
things.
control the national unemployment.
Yeah.
So focusing on what you can control and trying to tune out some of the noise, I think will make you a lot happier.
That's right.
So, great time to wrap up. I'm Bridget Sullivan Mermel, and I own a family financial planning practice in Chicago. And this is John Shearer, and he's got his practice here in Middleton, Wisconsin. We are both proud members of ACP, or the Alliance of Comprehensive Planners. If you like how we're talking about this, and you're looking for an advisor in your area. Well, first of all, John and I both work with people all over the country, but if you're looking for somebody that you can meet face to face in your area, check out acplanners.org.
That's right. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And thanks for watching.